Daniel and Patricia Lewi founded Cure and Action for Tay-Sachs Foundation in June 2011, after their daughter Amelie was diagnosed with a neurodegenerative disease in March of that year. Dan is also the head of business development and patient advocacy at Pulse Infoframe. He's here to share his patient advocacy journey. Let's start off with what a patient advocate actually is and what a patient advocate does.
That's a really interesting question and quite varied, especially in the rare disease space, because an advocate really has to do everything for the community they support. So it can be everything from raising awareness just to the general public about a disease and a condition. And they can also be raising awareness within research partners and industry and pharma. So a lot of time there is just really trying to drum out that this disease exists and that we kind of like are raising awareness about it. But then on top of that, especially in the rare space, you wear so many hats as an advocate. You will be doing the fundraising, you'll be leading projects, trying to enforce change in how treatments are done, how research is done. So really it's kind of an all-encompassing role of kind of driving forward the community that you support to ensure kind of gets all the support, all the information, and more people know about them. So it's quite an intense position as a rare disease patient advocate.
And now it's certainly not something that most people plan to get into at some point in time in their lives. And in your case, it happened when your oldest daughter, Amelie, was diagnosed with Tay-Sachs disease at 15 months. When your family received that diagnosis, did you know at that time what it meant to be a patient advocate?
Absolutely none. And this was the challenge, kind of entering into this world. So it was about 10 years ago when we entered it. We had no idea what advocacy was really. We had no idea, about the disease she suffered from, but then actually we had no idea how to drive forward the research and the treatments and the community building that was required. So we kind of learned as we went along. And what's been quite exciting is you get to meet so many different people who've been in the same position as you, and everyone's very open. So you share your experiences and your success stories. But that learning phase kind of continues. Even today, we pick up new skills and new ideas about how we can be better advocates. And I think that's key, is never resting on your laurels. And it's just really interesting because when I look back to where we were, my wife and I, kind of 10, 12 years ago, even before Emily was diagnosed, when we just met, how different our lives were and how different our life plans were. And when you get the impact of this sort of rare disease and then watching your daughter suffer and go through such a terrible disease, it kind of changes you as an individual and you learn so much. And advocacy has really helped us come to terms with that and actually helped us shape as individuals and how we are. And I think we're better people for having been through the experience we've been through.
Wow. So in that journey, you and your wife, Patricia, you chose to try to connect with other families who had children living with Tay-Sachs. What drove that decision?
Really what drove the decision was just the isolation you feel at diagnosis. And thankfully now it's very different, but at the time we were given this diagnosis that, your daughter is suffering from a disease called Tay-Sachs. It's very rare. You're never going to meet someone else. Your child is going to pass away probably by the age of 3. It's best if you just go home and make some memories together. And what's very difficult, especially in a neurodegenerative disease like Tay-Sachs, is that we had this smiley 15-month-old child sitting on our lap, laughing, playing with toys, and they're telling you she can end up having relentless seizures, she's going to need a feeding tube, she's going to go deaf and blind, she'll be in a wheelchair, she's a feeding tube. But then you have this child just sitting there smiling, and you can't comprehend what the future will be because it's not there. It's not like you're facing at that time. So we really wanted to speak to other people to really get to grips of kind of what our future would be as a family. And that's what really drove our decision. We didn't want to be, going through this journey alone. We wanted to reach out to other people who are in the same position as us so they could also get support. And to be honest, we just thought the best thing for us was just to meet more people and create a community to provide, a peer-to-peer support. Because at the end of the day, we know what other families have been been through or going through. And I think that support is really, really important, especially in that rare disease space where you feel so isolated. You know, thankfully now things are very different. So families do have the required support. They have a network they're kind of contacted to straight away. I think that's really, really important.
And now, for some families, when they receive such a life-changing diagnosis, their first instinct might be to actually withdraw and to pull themselves more into isolation. What advice might you have for a family who finds themselves in that kind of situation?
It's a really difficult question, a difficult one to really answer. But what I suppose what's helped us a bit is that when you sit there and you see your child is going through this terrible experience now, and they're passing away in front of you, and we always say you kind of mourn your child before they die with a disease like Tay-Sachs. What I would say is, sadly, you're not the only family going through this. And as rare as it is, and you know, as much as people tell you this is terrible, you're not going to meet another family, there are other people who have been through it, and there are other people who can give you advice and guidance and help and how to manage it. And it's such a complex disease and such a difficult position you're placed in as a parent and as a carer. For me, and what's really helped, you know, our community is actually just having a community to speak to, not being, you know, shy and withdrawn. You need to reach out and speak to other people so you can get their experiences. You know, we were told Emily would die by the age of 3. She actually lived the age of 8. And a lot of that was nothing that we did which was unique in terms of her care. It was just speaking to other people, seeing what worked for them and their child, how they made them more comfortable and made sure they had a high quality of life. It's the same we do with Emily. And actually, she had a relatively high quality of life, all things considered, because we listened and because we spoke to other families who'd been through it before.
Through that communication, so you were able to take some more steps to move forward, actually, instead of locking yourselves up and stopping. What other steps can families take who received a rare disease diagnosis so that they can move forward in some way?
Really, I think the next steps, and what really helped us, was to always have something to look forward to. So we wouldn't sit at home, you know, and let this terrible situation, because it is terrible, get the best of you. It's actually just planning. So we would always have something to look forward to every 4 or 6 weeks. And I'm talking small things like just going to the cinema, you know, with a child in a wheelchair with their siblings, and they're going to take an extra buggy, another kid walking or on their scooter next to you. You've got to take medication and feeding and suction machines. But actually planning that trip to cinema cheers everyone up. And maybe you do that every 3 or 4 weeks. That's something to look forward to. So we always had these little kind of goals to look forward to and plan for. So we're never kind of sitting still. And I think that really helped us. And we got to do so many things that, looking back, we have no idea how we did it. Like we took all 3 kids. We took Emily, wheelchair, so many issues with like feeding tubes and everything, suction machines and medication. Her brother had just turned 1 and her sister had turned 5, all the way down to south of France via train, you know, to a beach holiday. I mean, how we did that, how we had the energy to do that. But we did because we had planned ahead, had something to look forward to. And for about 6 months, that was our focus, to get on that holiday. And I think having these kind of small goals and a bigger goal at the end can really, really help kind of ensure you enjoy life, because at the end of the day, that's what we have to do. You know, you can't let the situation get on top of you. So just enjoy things and enjoy your life together. I think that's really, really important.
And then, okay. And then, so when Emily passed away, your family chose to continue patient advocacy. You could have said, this has been too painful, we're done. You chose not to. How come?
Well, it would have been a waste of time, wouldn't it? I mean, we put so much work into it. And I think to see the developments where we had got to when Emily passed away, and actually where we are now, so we're 10 years old as a patient group, it's amazing to think how far we came from having no treatments, no research. We had no community here in Europe. We had no registry. People were diagnosed, we're given a printout of a photocopy. You know, now people have a support network. They're given information, a diagnosis, they're connected. Depending what country they're in, and we've set up charities throughout Europe. Treatments are happening. We've got gene therapy programs that have started, drug repurposing, small molecule programs from big pharma, small biotechs. The landscape's very different. And to to think that when she passed away, we would have thought, okay, we'll pass that on. We don't want to be involved. I think would have been a disservice to Emily. She was such a big part of that journey for us and for our community. And our real goal is just to see this to the end. We want to make sure that we can get these treatments into children, and also we can then get newborn screening in, so the kids are treated very early. And I think until we're there, I don't see myself or Patricia ever stepping back from that, because we're like 100% committed to making sure that no other family and no other child has to go through what Emily did, because there are going to be solutions in the future.
So you and your wife are raising, your 2 other children. You're running Cure and Action for Tay-Sachs Foundation, which you founded together, and you're working. So what advice do you have for other people who are trying to do the same thing? They want to raise awareness for their own patient group. They're working, they have family to look after. How do you juggle all of that?
Yeah. The advice I would have is that hard work pays off. And I think there's no substitute for that. And so this has not been an easy journey for us personally and professionally, but the rewards are above and beyond anything you could imagine. I mean, to think that we went from 10 years to having no research, no pharma, no studies, and actually things happening now is amazing. And my advice is, if you just work hard and stick at it, you can make a difference. And that's kind of what we did. We were never doing this for Emily, so we're never looking for treatments for her, because we always knew that sadly the disease would be too advanced for her. But for the children of the future, we could actually do something. And that's what's always driven us on, that kind of end goal, that we can make a difference to other people. And so, as I said, just really hard work. That's just accepting that that's what it's going to be. But it's a very rewarding thing to do, because you can make a difference.
So the last question that I have is more about mental health now, because with patient advocacy, it's often tied to a personal story, as it is for you and Patricia, and possibly one involving loss, and that can take a toll on mental health. So what advice can you offer to patient advocates about how they can take care of their mental health while they're going on this journey and trying to advocate for their family and for others?
That's a really good question. And mental health is something that sometimes is overlooked from an advocacy side. I think as an advocate, sometimes you end up taking on a lot of emotional burden from other people. So not just you and your family, but also those families you speak to and those families you support. I still remember the first child who we were looking after who passed away, and getting the phone call from the hospice, and how that affected me as an individual, and not even starting then to think about the impact it had on the family. So you have to be have resilience. Be really resilient, that you're going to be in these very difficult situations. And one thing that I found has been very helpful is having a good relationship with my wife, so we can be open and honest with our emotions and feelings, especially talking through decisions we make. And then having friends you can lean on as well, who'd really understand what you're going through. I think that's been the big learning curve for me, is that the friendships you make on this journey with other parents is very, very important, because they can truly understand what you're going through. Not being ashamed to talk about it. There are days that we still cry. There's days where we laugh, but there's nothing wrong with that. And looking back, actually, that the days when you're sad, be sad. There's nothing wrong to be sad. But the days where you're happy, again, be happy. There's nothing wrong with that. Even though your child may have passed away, it's not a bad thing to be happy again. I think that's sometimes what people forget, is you can be happy after going through what we go through in this community.
And I think that's a really important point too, is that people feel, my general impression is when somebody goes through something, so much grief, they feel like they can't be happy anymore, because it's doing a disservice to what caused the grief in the first place. So that's a really good point. Was there anything about the patient advocate journey that I haven't asked about that you still want to mention?
I think on the advocacy journey, it's so winding, and it can be difficult, it can be rewarding, it can be confusing, it can be exhilarating. There's no straight line to going through this whole process. And that's the real thing I learned, is you just end up being quite versatile and being able to roll with it. And I think that if you want to be a really effective advocate, you have to be willing to listen to your community and strive what's best for them. I think that when you can give that message out to people, especially when you're speaking to industry, for example, you can represent them, you can really make a difference. So I think it's just having that ability just to think about your community that you can enforce change.
Great. Thank you so much.